With my hands neatly folded in my lap, I sat in the church's front row and gazed at the polished wood coffin at the altar. There was my mother within, whom I had tried to please all my life and who had made it cruelly obvious until her last breath that I would never be enough. My eyes pinched at the edges, but not because I was sad. They were for the kind of closure I knew I would never get. My sister Olivia, who was next to me, gave a dramatic sniffle while wiping her eyes with a handkerchief edged in lace. She still managed to make everything about herself. Connor, her spouse, put a consoling arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. As usual, she looked flawless. Even at a funeral, her makeup looked flawless. Her golden locks fell in graceful waves, and her beautiful black dress fit her body perfectly. In order to avoid looking at my aunt and uncle, who were sitting rigidly in the second row, I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat. They were aware. Everyone was aware. Nothing at all, could have prepared me for the words that followed. But I had assured myself that I wouldn't care and that I had prepared myself for what was about to happen. The last hit following the funeral, we assembled in the church's tiny side room, where Mr. Holloway, the family attorney, was standing holding a leather briefcase and adjusting his glasses while looking at my parents' final will and testament. I stood with my jaw clenched and my arms crossed, preparing myself for what I knew was coming. Mr. Holloway remarked, "I'm sorry, Mandy," in a measured voice. "Your parents left everything to Olivia." The words didn't register for a second. All of it, not the majority, not a sizable fraction. All of it, everything. I blinked, my throat parched, my heart thumping. After hesitating, Mr. Holloway nodded, "Yes," and then, seemingly to lessen the shock, he added, "Your parents thought you were self-sufficient and didn't need financial assistance, but Olivia, being a stay-at-home mom, needed the support more." A chilly, numb feeling crept over me, sufficiently independent. While Olivia sailed through life without doing a thing, I worked my way through college, working 2 jobs to pay for tuition. While Olivia resided in a home she hadn't worked a day to afford, I purchased my own vehicle, apartment, and life. Even though I had never once begged my parents for assistance, they still believed that I wasn't deserving of what should have been mine. "That's ridiculous," my Aunt Marlene whispered to herself, breaking the tense silence. Olivia, though? She didn't even appear startled. Rather, she sighed softly and covered my palm with a well-groomed hand. "Mandy, you've always been so independent. Mom and Dad just wanted to help me, that's all," she said in a voice full of phony sorrow. "That's all." I gazed at her hand on mine, the bravado, the arrogance. Then, with my voice hardly audible above a whisper, I gently withdrew. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. They may have mentioned something before," she said, biting her lip and dropping her gaze. And there it was. The ultimate reality, the affirmation that my parents' partiality wasn't merely an emotion, it was intentional, genuine, and indisputable. The impulse to shout, to strike out, to demand how my parents continued to tell me that I was never good enough even after I was dead, clutched at my neck. However, I didn't, because I'd learned from years of being the underappreciated daughter that anger wouldn't make things better. Instead, I grinned, because if they previously believed that I was independent, they were unaware of my current capabilities. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Holloway. I won't be contesting the will," I said in a calm, controlled voice as I turned to face the lawyer. "Wait, you're not mad?" Olivia asked, her brow downcast. After giving her a long, thoughtful glance, I lowered my voice so that only she could hear it, tilted my head, and took a small step closer. With a knife-sharp smile, I whispered, "Oh, Liv, I don't need their money." She mistook my words for capitulation, and her shoulders slumped in relief. Turning on my heel, I left that office with a proud stance. Olivia was unaware that I had already made our beloved parents their parting present. It would also be a memorable experience. A whole life of ignorance. My parents didn't always see me as invisible. I don't believe I was, at least. They must have noticed me when I was a toddler, grabbing at my mother's skirt or talking incoherently to my father. When they actually did see me, however, as I became older, it was hard to overlook how different Olivia and I were. The golden child was her, the beloved daughter who was impervious to wrongdoing, and me? I was the last thing on the list. It began modestly, My parents prepared a celebration for Olivia's first dance performance victory when she was 6 years old, complete with cake, decorations, and the entire show. When I won a spelling bee that year, my mother gave me a pat on the head and told me to keep up the excellent work. Olivia received a brand new automobile with a large red bow when she turned 16. A secondhand bicycle was given to me for my 16th birthday because you don't really go out much anyway, Mandy. I convinced myself that it made no difference and that I didn't require the love, respect, or approval of others. But in the back of your mind, it hurt. Nevertheless, I put forth a lot of effort at work, but Olivia got by on her charm and parental favoritism. I constructed something for myself. I saved every money, found a steady job in finance, earned my way through college, and never depended on anyone. However, none of it mattered in the end, because Olivia still received everything the moment they left. An alternative form of justice, I sat in my small apartment that night, gazing at the ceiling while mentally repeating those words. Your parents left everything to Olivia. They did, of course. Why should I anticipate a different outcome? I was startled out of my reverie when my phone buzzed and I saw a message from Aunt Marlene. Mandy, I just wanted to let you know that you deserve better, since I think what your parents did was abhorrent. Another message appeared a moment later. It's unfair, so you should oppose this and challenge the will. Just. I laughed at the word. My connection with my parents has never been equitable. I had long since come to terms with that, however. I couldn't stand Olivia sitting there seeming as though she didn't know and that this was just another annoyance. I wasn't interested in their money. However, that didn't mean I wouldn't contribute to their history. I opened my laptop, checked my email, and contacted the only person who could assist me. For Olivia had committed one grave error. She assumed I would overlook this. However, she was clueless about who she was interacting with. I didn't get any sleep that evening. With the weight of years bearing down on me, I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. The will was never the only factor in this situation. This was about all the times I was ignored, told I was resilient enough to be forgotten, and sat in silence while Olivia basked in the glory that rightfully belonged to me. I had been too long in accepting it. However, no longer when the sun came up, I had already decided the money and their scraps were not things I was going to battle for. I intended to reclaim what was already mine. Olivia, too, she was unaware of what was about to happen. A tour of the home that was never a residence after a week. I was standing in front of their home. Alternatively, Olivia's home now, the location of my upbringing, where I repeatedly discovered that I would always come in second. The fragrance remained the same. The scent of my mother's lavender perfume infused into the walls, the smell of freshly cut grass. However, it wasn't home. It had been a while since then. Olivia answered the door with a phony look of surprise on her face. She chirped, "Mandy, I wasn't expecting you," and cocked her head as if she hadn't been anticipating this. Like if she hadn't taken everything away from me and expected me to simply accept it like I always did. "I need to pick up some things," I said casually, forcing a smile. "Mom had some personal letters and keepsakes I'd like to have," I added. Olivia paused for a little moment, then moved aside and graciously waved me in, saying, "Of course, take whatever you need." She believed that this was the end of it. She believed that I was conceding defeat. She was unaware of my true purpose for being here, hidden aspects of an antique desk. I moved carefully through the home, with each step, memories pressed against me. The living room, where I had witnessed my parents praising Olivia, the dining table, where I used to sit quietly as they extolled her most recent achievements. I made myself maintain my composure, keep moving, and focus on my goal. The old study of my father, with my fingers skimming through old papers, notes, and letters. I opened the desk drawer. Then I discovered it, the original will and testament of my parents. As I opened the pages and skimmed the text, my heart raced, and there it was. A provision that was absent from the final draft. A provision saying that Olivia and I were to share equally in my parents' estate. My breath caught. She altered it. Olivia had not only come to terms with being the favorite, she had taken everything. She had ensured that I had nothing when I left. The instant she realized she was captured with my heart thumping in my ears, I turned. Olivia stood with her arms folded in the doorway, her expression serene, too serene. "You weren't supposed to see that," she remarked in a bland, nearly bored voice. She wasn't even making an effort to hide it. She was only irritated that I had figured it out. She wasn't afraid or humiliated. I gazed at her, hoping for her to clarify, confess, or even express a shred of sorrow. She shrugged instead. She stated in a light-hearted, informal tone, "Mom and Dad always intended for me to have everything," adding, "I just made sure their wishes were properly carried out." I despised her more than ever before. I had the option of screaming, fighting, or marching directly to a lawyer to expose her. However, I didn't rather. I grinned. I folded the paper neatly and murmured, "Thank you for your honesty," my voice as smooth as silk. "That's all I needed to know," I said. After saying that, I left the house. I'm already preparing my next move. An alternative form of Justice Olivia had committed a grave error. She assumed I would act like I usually have. She assumed I would take it, swallow it, and go on. She didn't know who she was interacting with. The following week, I planned. I could have contacted a lawyer right away, challenged the will in court. However, court cases were slow and untidy. And Olivia? She exercised caution. I was certain that she had hid her identity by now. No, something else was needed for this. Something that would strike her in the most painful spot. All I needed was the appropriate person to assist me. The all-knowing man. He was in an old tavern downtown when I found him. The type where there is low lighting, a subtle whiskey odor permeating the wooden walls. I sat into the booth across from Olivia's husband and said, "Hello, Connor." He was shocked as he looked up. He didn't anticipate me. He scowled and put down his glass, asking, "Mandy? What are you doing here?" I tilted my head and folded my hands on the table. "I know about the will." His whole body froze. "What?" I spoke softly as I leaned in. "I know Olivia changed it," I stated while carefully observing him. "I found the version in Dad's study. My parents wanted me to have half of everything, but Olivia made sure that never happened." Connor wiped a palm across his face and exhaled slowly. "He seems unsurprised." "You knew," I responded in a cold voice. It wasn't an inquiry. Gazing at his glass, he sighed. "I had my suspicions," he said. "But Olivia, she controls everything, the finances, the house, the accounts. I don't ask questions anymore." Naturally, he didn't. In their marriage, Olivia had always been the one in charge. He was merely a passenger. I wasn't here to pass judgment on Connor, though. I came to utilize him. "The start of the end, listen," I continued, my voice becoming softer. "I've never cared about the money." "Olivia thinks you do," said Connor with a snort. "Olivia thinks a lot of things," I stated, "but she's wrong." With my voice reduced to a whisper, I leaned forward. "I don't want her money, I just want her to pay for what she did." Connor looked at me for a while. Then, to my amazement, he shook his head and laughed. He whispered, "God, I'd love to see that." "But Olivia? She always wins, Mandy," he said. "She's untouchable." I grinned slowly and icily. I responded, "Not this time, since Olivia didn't know what I did, and I was going to put it to use. Olivia's perfect life is cracked." I studied Olivia's ideal existence in depth throughout the course of the following week. Property documents and bank statements didn't pique my curiosity. I desired a personal item, and finding it didn't take long. I came across it late one evening while looking through old social media posts. An image taken 3 years ago. Olivia and her friends went to Italy for a vacation. The issue? That excursion had never been taken by Connor. I selected the names of the tags. One was quite noticeable. David Carlisle. A man. He was more than just a companion. He was more than that. I scrolled through his account and clicked. And there it was. A series of years' worth of late-night communications, inside jokes, and flirty comments. Connor had been cheated on by Olivia. Additionally, she was careless about it. As I reclined in my chair, my heart was racing. That was it. My initial action, Olivia, checkmate. Although Connor was unaware of it at the time, his world was about to collapse. Olivia, too? She would experience every moment of it. Sitting in my apartment's dim light, I scrolled through years' worth of evidence, including images that weren't intended for her husband to see. messages Olivia had neglected to remove. She believed she could not be touched. She assumed I would simply leave. However, she had misjudged the individual this time. I took a big breath, opened Connor's number, sent the screenshots, and no explanations, no words, simply said. My phone buzzed less than a minute later. Where did you purchase these, Connor? Me, is it important? After a lengthy gap, Connor, let's get together tomorrow. We must speak. I grinned. Olivia, checkmate. The final straw, I met Connor at a peaceful cafe on the outskirts of town the following evening. He was bent over a cup of coffee, staring at the table blankly when I got there. When he saw me when he looked up, I knew he had witnessed everything. I took the seat across from him, and for a while, neither of us said anything. There was something brittle in the air between us. Disbelief, rage, perhaps even relief. Finally, in a raspy voice, he inquired, "How long?" I pushed my coffee aside and breathed. I muttered, "From what I found, at least 4 years." Connor shook his head and laughed bitterly. He said, "Of course," clutching his coffee cup as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said after hesitating. "No, you're not," he said with a snort and a head shake. "You wanted me to know. You wanted this to happen," he said, his dark, unfathomable eyes fixed on mine. I didn't dispute it. "Yes," I said, "but only because Olivia deserved to be exposed." "Exposed?" he said again in a hollow voice. "She's been playing everyone, Connor," I replied, leaning in. "Me? You? Even my parents, right up until they died. And now, what?" he mumbled, letting out a sigh and stroking his hair. "What do you want from me, Mandy?" I cocked my head to observe him. "I don't want your money," I said. "I don't want your sympathy." Leaning closer, I spoke steadily. "I just want to watch her world fall apart." After a prolonged period of staring, Connor's lips slowly formed a little gloomy smile. He said, "You're not the only one." For almost an hour, we sat there reviewing everything. Olivia's deceit, manipulation, and phony will. Connor was furious, but not in a violent manner. No, his rage was more subdued and controlled, the kind that caused destruction. At last, he stated, "I want a divorce," in a steady voice, "and I want full custody of the kids." It was a daring action, a well-thought-out blow. Olivia had spent years creating the ideal persona, a devoted mother, a loving wife. She required that picture. What about Connor? He was going to tear it from her. The start of the end, I stayed safe and watched as Connor's attorney brought the divorce papers to Olivia's house the following morning. She responded while wearing a silk robe, her hair groomed to perfection, and holding a hot cup of coffee. However, her face became horrible the moment she saw the envelope. I wanted to hear her response, the astonishment. The fear, rather. I observed her clenching her fingers around the pages, knuckles white. Then, for a little instant, she looked about, nor to her children, nor to Connor. To the neighbors, however, she was more concerned with their opinions than with the fact that her marriage was failing in front of her. Olivia in her classic form. I ought to have left after that. Let Connor take care of the remainder. However, I wasn't done yet. Olivia continued to believe she could steer the story. That, as usual, she could use manipulation to get out of this. She was mistaken. I made sure of it that night. I posted the evidence of her affair with a few clicks, including screenshots, texts, images. However, I didn't forward them to Connor. I shared them with everyone in her social circle. The homeowners association, the charity board members, the mother group chats, all the people she cared about. Seeing the golden child drop, the consequences were immediate. Olivia's phone exploded with messages and calls. At first, she attempted to reject it, to explain it away as a miscommunication. However, there was too much proof. She was a pariah by the following morning. The companions she had cultivated for years, they had no desire to interact with her. Additionally, Olivia was alone herself for the first time in her life. The problem with individuals like Olivia is that they never think they are subject to consequences. To fit their interpretation of reality, they alter, deceive, and distort the facts. They consider themselves invincible, that everything will always go their way, regardless of what they do. Not this time, though. I ensured that her final action, Olivia, was in a downward spiral a week after I sent out the proof of her infidelity. Her formerly devoted pals had abandoned her. During drop-offs, the school mothers muttered behind her back. She had been asked to resign by the charity board, where she had previously had a dominant position. Worst of all, Connor had taken the children with him when he moved out. She had lost everything. However, Olivia wasn't the type to die quietly. No, she had one more thing to do. She called me while I was at work. I contemplated disregarding it, allowing her to linger in the mess she created. However, I felt compelled to hear it. On the third ring, I responded, "You ruined my life." Her voice was unpolished and nearly unidentifiable. "No, Olivia," I answered quietly. "You did that all on your own." She laughed sharply and bitterly. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won. I didn't blink," I said coolly. "I just needed the truth to come out. I don't need to win." She was quiet for a while. Her tone then shifted to something icier. "You don't understand. Mandy," she said quietly, "you think you've taken everything from me, fine, but you better watch your back, because I have nothing left to lose." She hung up after saying that. A typical individual might have been afraid. However, I was acquainted with Olivia. She talked a lot. I wasn't going to lower my defenses, though. Not just yet. Olivia may have lost her marriage, her reputation, and her idealized persona. However, one more thing remained: the home. And I was going to accept that as well. Olivia believed she could intimidate me. I was meant to be frightened by that one phone call and those final words, "I have nothing left to lose." However, I had long since ceased giving her the luxury of fear. She was left with one item, the residence, and I was going to accept that as well. The final item in the puzzle I called Connor as soon as I ended my call with Olivia. "Do you still have the original will?" I responded. "Yeah, why?" he asked, hesitating. "Because it's time to fix what Olivia broke," I said with a slow, pointed smile. The house battle. After several more weeks, my attorney finally filed the case. Olivia had falsely changed court records, a grave offense. Additionally, there was ample evidence. She had no chance after Connor's statement. The court made a decision in my favor. The initial desires of my parents were restored. This meant that I now owned half of everything, including the house. Seeing her lose everything, Olivia's expression when the sheriff arrived with the eviction notice, is something I will always remember. With her silk robe tightly wrapped around her, her hair disheveled, and fear in her eyes, she bounded onto the porch. "This is my house!" she cried in a furious, loud voice. "You can't do this!" Arms crossed, I stood at the end of the driveway and watched as reality set in. "Simply put, not anymore," I said. Her entire body was trembling, and her eyes were crazy. She growled, "You took everything from me!" I answered calmly as I cocked my head. "No, Olivia, I just took back what was mine." Her eyes were desperate, her lips parted. She said, "Where am I supposed to go?" I allowed the quiet to linger between us. I then gave her one final present while grinning the sweetest. An old, worn bicycle, similar to the one my folks gave me on my 16th birthday. Her face twisted in terror as she gazed at it. I whispered, "Good luck, Liv. You'll need to be self-sufficient now." After that, I turned around, went back inside my house, and closed the door. She was left standing there by herself. In her life, for the first time, destroying the past with fire, the home was silent. I didn't feel alienated when I entered its halls for the first time in years. No more critical looks, no more hushed discussions about Olivia's differences from mine. Now it was mine, not only in terms of the law, but in all respects. But even so, as I stood in the opulent living room with its pricey furnishings and tastefully chosen decor, I had no feelings. I had never called this location home. It had served as a battlefield, a representation of all I had been denied, and I was fully aware of my next course of action. The very following day, I listed the house for sale. Not for financial gain, not in retaliation, however, as I want a fresh start. Olivia's dominion had been this house, the shrine to my parents' ideal daughter, and I didn't want to be involved. I observed the for sale sign being driven into the grass from a distance. Additionally, I've never in my life, it wasn't as though I was losing anything. I thought I was winning. Olivia's final destination, as opposed to Olivia, was not doing well. Mutual acquaintances informed me that she was having difficulties. Connor was granted complete custody, and without him to support her way of life, everything quickly fell apart. When I last saw her, she rented a little flat on the city's outskirts, holding a low-level position that she hated. Additionally, for once, no safety net was in place. Without parents to help her, no supportive social network to support her, at last, she was leading the kind of life she had always despised. What's hilarious, though? I didn't feel victorious also, I didn't feel bad. I simply felt finished. The cash I never required. The money from my parents' estate that I got, I gave the majority of it away. Not with malice, however, since I had created my own life without their assistance, and I wasn't defined by their wealth. I saved enough to start again in another place, another city, and another existence, one in which I wasn't the neglected daughter Mandy, only Mandy. Aunt Marlene's last remarks. Aunt Marlene requested me to join her for dinner a week prior to my departure from town. The only family member who had really supported me through everything had been her. She grabbed my hand as we sat at the table. "You know," she remarked with a kind smile, "your parents were wrong about you." I arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" She squeezed my fingers and nodded. "They always thought you were the one who didn't need them," she stated. "That you were too strong, too independent, but the truth is, they needed you," she sighed. "What do you mean?" I scowled. She looked contemplative as she stirred her tea. "They built their entire world around Olivia because she needed to be propped up," she explained. "She needed their validation, their money, their constant approval. But you?" she asked, grinning. "You thrived despite them, and that scared them." The phrases became ingrained in me. Perhaps she was correct. Perhaps my parents hadn't disregarded me because I wasn't worthy. Perhaps they disregarded me because they realized I didn't require their assistance as much as Olivia did. Additionally, for the first time, it didn't harm to think that. Leaving for good, as I packed my final belongings that evening, I looked around my former room one last time. The girl who lived here before, the person who worked over years to establish her worth, was no longer there. Instead of her, a woman with nothing more to demonstrate. I grabbed my luggage, left through the door, and didn't turn around. Since I wasn't defined by my past, my future did. Additionally, I've never in my life at last. I was free. I had no regrets when I left town. No hesitancy, no residual affection. I was not fleeing. I was leaving according to my terms. I was not abandoning something unfinished for the first time in my life. I had prevailed. Olivia, too? At last, she understood what it was like to lose. The final attempt, after several months, I had become accustomed to my new life, a new apartment, a new city, and a new me. No more rumors of my parents' partiality, no more memories of my early years spent attempting to fit in. I had freedom. Then one evening, while enjoying a glass of wine and watching the sunset from my balcony, my phone buzzed. An electronic mail. From Olivia, I gazed at it for a considerable amount of time, with my finger lingering over the screen. Curiosity then prevailed, and I opened it. Subject: we must speak. Hey, Mandy. The first, understand that a lot has transpired and that you are likely still upset. But I believe it's time for us to move on. There's no use in clinging to the past. What's done is done. The fact that we are sisters should be sufficient in any case. You are missed. Before it's too late, let's solve this. Olivia, I chuckled. A loud, uncontrolled, and unconcerned chuckle. She wasn't saying sorry. She wasn't admitting her actions. She was rephrasing it as though there had been a miscommunication between them. As if both of us had erred, I nearly felt bad for her. Nearly, then, without thinking twice, I clicked erase and stopped her email. Olivia was correct about one thing, so nothing remained to cling to. Not because I was still upset, however. Because I just stopped caring the life that she was due. I learned through rumors that Olivia was still having difficulties. She had lost too many allies, too many bridges. After taking the children, Connor was doing well without her. She had been replaced by her old pals, the women who used to listen to all she had to say. She had become a cautionary tale and nothing in their world. I had anticipated that she would attempt to clamber back to the top, to charm, to influence. However, she never did. Perhaps she was at last exhausted. Or perhaps she experienced what it was like to be completely alone for the first time in her life. She had made me feel that way for years. The calm I didn't know I needed. I sipped my coffee at a tiny cafe one day while observing the surroundings. Olivia wasn't on my mind. My parents weren't on my mind. I wasn't even considering the past. In my life, for the first time, I was merely existing. No pressure to live up to expectations, no pressing need to prove myself, no despair, no rage, simply peace in that. That was the true triumph. Olivia needed someone to support her throughout her life. Thus, but me? I had never been in need of anyone, and I was at last comfortable with that. I strolled out into the sun after finishing my coffee and grinning to myself, without ever turning around, since Olivia's tale was over and mine was only getting started.